Well, my name's George Sibley. I was born in western Pennsylvania, but I was conceived in Colorado in 1941. My father was a mining engineer. He actually was part of what became a major revolution in the coal mining industry, which was the mechanization of the whole process of digging the coal out. He was the project engineer for Joy Manufacturing, on which was a large mining machinery company. He was the project engineer for the first continuous miner that went into the field, and this was a device that kind of sumped into the base of a wall of coal that formerly coal miners had to drill into and blow up with powder. It just dug in there under powerful hydraulics and raised itself and broke a bunch of coal off, which it transferred back into some shuttle cars that took it to the surface. And 2 or 3 men operating a miner, a continuous miner, and shuttle drivers could do more production in a few hours than it used to be done in a week. Increased the productivity in quite a lot. A lot of that went to the miners because of the influence of John L. Lewis and the Coal Miners Union at the time, and it was basically a real revolution in the field. It ended up kind of ski bumming. I spent a winter in Loveland and was going to go deeper into the mountains after that. I figured there was no place for Army dropout in the society besides somewhere in the mountains. And I was going to go to Aspen, but happened to see an ad, or not an ad, but a small story in the Rocky Mountain News while I was having breakfast one day down in Denver, where I'd been working construction that summer, saying that Crested Butte was going to be open for the winter. This was in November. They had just come through a financial reorganization, otherwise known as a bankruptcy, and had decided that the 12 banks that ended up buying the ski area decided that they would go ahead and open, even though they had no publicity out at all or anything, would just be counting on people coming back who had been there before, plus the college and whatever. So they were ready to open, but I came over to see if I could get a job. I had my one investment in my future had been to take a first aid class the winter I was working up at Loveland Ski Area. So I was qualified at that time to be a ski patrolman. Now you have to be basically you need to be an EMT to even, and you have to be a really good skier. I was neither a good skier nor very proficient in the kind of medicine you need for helping people out on mountains. But at any rate, I got here and found out that it was fairly easy to get a job at Crested Butte that winter because the year before, paychecks had been spotty and had not been any at all for the last month or so due to the financial situation. And nobody wanted to work for the ski area that knew anything about it. So I got a job on the ski patrol and really came at the right time to luck into a situation like that. My job was at the ski area, but where I really got interested in the town of Crested Butte. It was actually the first place I'd ever been where I began to understand the meaning of the word community. It was, in some respects, 2 communities, but they overlapped pretty well in those days because one was not steamrolling the other like happened later on. But there was the residual miner population, a population of mostly retired miners, a few businessmen who had begun their life in the valley as miners, but were able to get out into businesses just about the time that the mines closed down in the early 1950s. Frank Storica at Storica's Bar, Tony Capuchin, the Stephanics, Tony Mihalik, and then the people that came to those, a lot of them were retired United Mine Workers employees who had actually had benefits from the John L. Lewis years with the mine. They thought he walked on water, and they always showed up with their United Mine Workers hats on. But so it was interesting to sit and talk and drink beer with them on my day off. Plus, there were the new people in town. There were ski bums like myself, a lot of us more educated than we needed to be to do the work we were doing, but not the least bit interested in applying our educations on jobs that might actually make us some money. At the time, when I went to work for the ski area, I got $300 a month, which isn't a whole lot of money, but at the same time I could rent a house in Crested Butte for $75. So it was, and they had $1.29 dinner specials at the Grub Steak Bar and Grill. We figured that Jerry and Tina Sampson just did that to get us in there, knowing we'd stick around and drink some beer. But we probably would have done that anyway, so they didn't have to practically give away food for us. But it was a cheap place to live at that time. So I didn't earn very much money, but I didn't need very much money, and that was kind of a nice thing at that time. But there were other new people in town that had businesses. There was Gene Martin, who's a retired retired Marine colonel, who was running a jewelry shop. He retired from being a Marine to being a jeweler. His son-in-law and daughter, Bonnie and Jim Cole, were running another shop in town. There were a couple or three professors from Western State College who were living in Crested Butte, including Dr. Art Norris, who was a business professor at Western. And they all got interested in trying to, how can we make this place more viable without ruining what's really pretty cool about the place. And that became an issue that we talked a lot about, sat around in the bars in the evening and talked about. And at one point, Dr. Norris said, what we really need here is a newspaper. And said, yeah, well, there's the Chronicle. There was the Crested Butte Chronicle, which a Gunnison printer, Fred Booty, had inherited with the bankruptcy because of lack of payment of bills to him. And he was continuing to crank it out because he got a little bit of town advertising, printing the town bills and that kind of thing. And he thought he had something that was a saleable product if the town really started to go. So Dr. Norris thought, well, we need a newspaper, and we'd need somebody to edit it. And I said, well, I've always wanted to be a writer. I had an English degree from University of Pittsburgh. Always wanted to be a writer. Okay, well, we got an editor then. Now what we need to do is get the newspaper. I didn't know a thing. I didn't know anything more about editing a newspaper than I'd known about ski patrolling when I showed up in Crested Butte. But you could do that kind of thing then. You could get away with it because anybody who knew anything about newspapering would know better than to buy a newspaper in a town of 300 that was basically busted and only had half a dozen businesses. But we went and talked to Fred Booty, and he said he wanted $3,000 for the Crested Butte Chronicle, which wasn't a whole lot of money, but it was a whole lot of money to me. And Dr. Norris and I retreated to the Oasis bar to have a beer and talk about it. And Norris said, you know, he's paying him. He's paying right now to keep printing that paper. If he had a printing contract from somebody else that would be paying for it, and somebody else doing all the work of, he was just putting together news from another newspaper he ran in Gunnison. There was really no Crested Butte news in it at all except the town bills that somebody sent down. And so we went back to Booty and said, look, said you're paying right now to print this paper out. You have to do the work every week to put it together. Why don't you consider having somebody else do that for 6 months and do a 6-month printing contract, and if at the end of the 6 months they can't pay you anymore, then you get the paper back, but you've had the winter off to, or the summer and the winter off to not have to do all that work. And Booty thought about it for a minute, and he said, oh, well, what the hell. So he sold us the newspaper for a 6-month printing contract and $1. And I became part owner and editor of the Crested Butte Chronicle, which was a 4-page weekly that sounded like an overwhelming task to me, filling up 4 pages with stuff I was going to write about Crested Butte, which was a town of 300 where not much was happening. But it wasn't as hard as I thought, and I really enjoyed it.